Yes, that's me. Some photos from my social media accounts. And I'm showing you that for two reasons. The first one is to show off a little bit about my international trips, why not? But second, and most important, is to explain what those trips have told me. Because traveling the world has been an incredible privilege. It has given me the chance to eat a croissant in front of the Eiffel Tower, to observe religions by visiting temples in Indonesia, to learn about the world history just by walking the streets of Rome and Berlin, to practice my Portuguese in Rio de Janeiro, and even from having certain neck pain from observing the enormous skyscrapers in the USA. They all have been unforgettable and breathtaking experiences. When we travel, we usually have certain expectations about the place, the people, the food, and the kind of experiences that we may have in that place. However, when we finally arrive to that destination, most of those expectations turned into a different version of the place and the people. In my case, traveling the world has been a learning path. Unfortunately, when I have traveled, I have also faced with some uncomfortable follow-up questions and assumptions that people don't even realize they are making. Maybe they are trying to sound fun or to be friendly with me by assuming they know something about me or about my country. However, then I need to reflect about those stereotypes, and then a small talk turns into a lecture of Colombian culture, because that image doesn't represent my country at all. So now, let me introduce myself. My name is Manuel, and I'm from Colombia. And I know that from the moment that I stood here, you all immediately began to make assumptions about me, based on my physical appearance, my country, my accent, the clothes that I'm wearing today. Then, for a long time I wondered, why does this keep happening, and even with well-intentioned people? Then I researched, and then I came across the Clark doll experiment. Let's think about it. If we gave a child two dolls that look exactly the same, except for the hair color and skin color, which one do you think they would prefer? The white doll or the black doll? Well, that was the main question in the Clark doll experiment, designed by a couple of psychologists in the 40s in the United States. This was one of the most controversial experiments related to racism and bias. Let me explain it. Afro-North American children were asked to choose between two dolls and decide which doll was the good doll and which one was the bad doll. I was shaken by knowing that children, they already have certain preferences about the skin color, and even from that early age. But the fact that moved me the most is that at the end of the test, they were asked to choose which one was the bad doll and which one looks more like them. Some children were hesitating, they were reflecting, and even kind of sad by assuming that the bad doll that they had previously chosen was the doll that looks like them. Since 1940, the Clark doll experiment has been replicated many times around the world, usually finding similar patterns. However, children are not born that way. They have absorbed all those expectations and prejudices from their environments, from schools, from the media, from family members, etc. This experiment showed something powerful. Prejudice is not something we were born with, it's something we learned. And if we learn it, we can unlearn it. Then, moving forward to the 50s, a psychologist called Gordon Allport proposed something radical for his time. He suggested that prejudice grows in the distance, but meaningful contact can reduce it. This is called the contact hypothesis. When members of different groups interact under correct and equal conditions, prejudice decreases. As a teacher, I can see daily how this idea works. I remember when I was a teacher in Indonesia, I had a big challenge. I had students from China, from Japan, from Singapore, from India, from the Philippines, and me, the teacher from Colombia. And then we were working on a simple project, the simulation of a volcano. That was amazing because we could interact and work on a common goal. We forgot that we spoke different languages, that we were from different nationalities, backgrounds, religions, traditions. We were focused on the project. To be honest, at the end, the volcano did not explode as in the videos on the internet. But we had so much fun together, and we could work as a tribe. And that's what really matters. Now we know, prejudice is learned, and contact can reduce it. But then I wondered again, contact doesn't always work. I have faced cultures which are so different from the way that I was raised, religions that I hardly understand, and traditions that are even against my own traditions. So, what can really change prejudice at a deeper level? Then, I researched again, and moving forward to the 90s, I found the common in-group identity model, a model designed by two psychologists, Samuel Gardner and John Dovidio. They proposed something interesting. They said that when we have larger groups of individuals as a part of we, prejudices also decrease. We need a membership. And what's our membership? We are global villagers. That's our tag on our foreheads. We are all different, that's for sure, and that is not going to change. But it's time to focus more on our similarities rather than on our differences. And in that way, we can be united in diversity. Now, there are some prejudices that don't shout. They whisper inside our minds, and that is called implicit bias. Those are automatic assumptions that our brain makes about people, groups, and identities. They operate quickly, quietly, and often without our awareness. Let's imagine that you are walking alone on a dark street, and then you see someone who is approaching. Then you immediately begin to think, who's coming? What does he or she look like? Is it safe? Is it familiar, unfamiliar? Should I run? Should I greet? What should I do? And that decision happens in milliseconds. The question is not whether our brains make those assumptions. They have to. The question is, where did the assumptions come from? Well, they come from the images we see, from the patterns that society repeats again and again, and from the stories that we hear. Let me give you one more example. Let's analyze if we have two resumes, and then one names sound more familiar to you culturally, and the other doesn't. In my case, I would choose Maria. That's my mother's name. But then I need to pause and rethink. Okay, until this point, we could say we can manage implicit bias and prejudice. We can have the perfect societies. We can get rid of prejudice forever. But no, prejudice is not always bad. Some evolutionary researchers argue that humans evolved in small groups where identifying friend versus a stranger was a matter of survival. But then, those mechanisms that once helped small groups to survive can become dangerous and harmful in our complex modern societies. The German philosopher Gadamer also argued that there are some prejudices which are unavoidable because they help us to understand the world before we reflect on it. But that's the main problem. If we don't reflect on our prejudices and then we stop being curious and we make generalizations, that's where prejudices become bad. So remember, 2 steps to get rid of your implicit bias and prejudice. Pause and rethink. Pause before making quick judgments, and rethink which assumptions am I making right now about this person or about this culture. Those 2 steps can interrupt your implicit bias and change your prejudices. Because prejudice is natural, but is neither right nor fair. Another step that you can do is to face some contradictory stereotypes. For example, female scientists leading major research projects, male nurses providing compassionate care, and immigrant entrepreneurs building successful businesses. Now, unfortunately, today, some groups have been shown in media, movies, and advertising in various stereotype roles. Today, many creators are trying to overcome those imbalances by increasing representation, and that effort matters for sure. But then, when we see that some diversity is added superficially without a context, that's what audiences call as forced inclusion. When diversity is added without a context and superficially, without deep stories and without real people, people notice it immediately. What we really need now is not more representation. We need better representation. Real people with real narratives, not stereotypes. Because the images that we watch today will reshape the prejudices that we will have tomorrow. So, now we know. Prejudice can be unlearned. How? Through curiosity instead of assumption, and through contact instead of distance. And then the circle grows. And that circle starts with you and me. Gracias.